February 5th. Dan, do you have the roll?
Yes.
Thank you. Do I have a motion to approve the minutes from December 4th, 2024? I have approval. Do I have a second? I have a
Bill
second.
second.
Okay. That being the case, any corrections, additions, changes to the minutes? Hearing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Minutes are approved. That takes us to appearances. Dan, do we have anybody to make an appearance this evening?
No appearances. We do have Callie sitting with us from the Herald Independent, just taking notes.
Okay, terrific, thank you. Then I will close the appearance section. We have no unfinished business. Sorry, my camera keeps going in and out. We will move to number 6A, new business discussion and consideration of approval of install no parking signs at several Madison Metro bus stop locations in the city. Dan?
Yep, thank you. So in the packet, we do have an ordinance document for the Madison Metro bus stop location. There are several locations where no parking needs to be approved by Public Works Committee and City Council. First off, in your packet, I do have a copy of the ordinance, a copy of the template signs, and then right from the Metro website for the City of Monona page for informational purposes, I included the Route 38 for Monona, and some FAQs that they have on their site. So that really doesn't pertain to what we're talking about. But in case we have people who watch the video when we're done, at least there's information for them to, I guess, review. That said, Madison Metro service in Monona starts on March 3rd. So we do have several locations, 8 of them, where no parking is needed because at these bus stops, parking is currently allowed at the curb line. So the poles have already been installed throughout the city for the Metro signs. You've probably seen a few of them as you've driven around. Once City Council approves this ordinance on February 17th, if they approve it, between then and March 3rd, my crew in Public Works will install the no parking signs and the Metro bus stop signs. So I'm seeking your review of this ordinance and recommendation to City Council tonight.
I have a question.
Yeah.
If the bus service is only going to be Monday through Friday, I think I heard. So should the sign say no parking Monday through Friday?
I'm not aware of that.
Am I wrong? I mean, I could. be.
I don't know the details on that.
Oh, okay.
I had just been given the task of
I heard that somewhere.
getting the no parking.
Leslie, that would be correct. Dan, that would be correct. The bus stops that are internal to Monona, which is on the basically on the west or east side, which is to say not Broadway, not Monona Drive, is Monday through Thursday service, and the ones that go down, or sorry, Monday through Friday service, and the ones that go down into the city center are not on the weekends.
Okay, so should the sign say no parking Monday through Friday?
So if that's the case, we can get plaques made up, because we already have the signs.
Oh.
We've already had them made up, but we can get plaques, put up underneath that states parking will be allowed on weekends.
Yeah, I apologize for not catching that earlier. I mean, well, obviously, this just came to city council on Monday, so
Yeah,
so it's not something that but yeah, that would be accurate. And of course, that's a yes. So
I can update City Council on February 17th, when this comes back for second reading.
yeah.
Okay.
I don't know if it's necessary to do. I just was kind of wondering what other places do.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I don't know that honestly, I'd have to look at the list again, more specifically. Dan, which I'd be happy to do offline in terms of the 8 spots that you have. You know, I don't know, to Leslie's point, I don't know, how big of an issue it would be. I mean, if parking in those particular areas is at a premium,
I believe the ones on Nichols Road are. I've seen vehicles park where we do have the empty signposts up.
okay,
But I also noticed there is room east or west of those locations where they can park. So I don't know if it's gonna be that big of a deal.
right.
So
And Dean is no parking already, isn't it?
westbound they can park.
Oh, yeah, that's right.
Well, if we don't do that later on, you may get some comments by people in the neighborhood, say who have company over the weekend, if they know
Right.
that it's only Monday through Friday.
Correct. Correct. I'd rather have it accurate. So,
It wouldn't take that much to get plaques made up and put
Okay.
them below the parking signs.
okay, terrific. Thank you, Dan.
Yep. So we're seeking a motion on this one.
I would make a motion to approve recommending the ordinance with the addition that we would put Monday through Friday signs underneath the no parking signs.
I'll second.
Any other discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor, say aye.
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 Motion carries. Thank you. Number 6B, discussion and consideration of the Veerbecker Professional Services Agreement to complete well 4 design and wellhead protection planning services. Dan?
Thank you, Nancy. In your packet, we do have the resolution and the draft agreement with Veerbecker to complete the design for well 4. We did talk about this last summer when we reviewed the capital budget. $148,000 is set aside in the 2025 capital budget for Veerbecker to complete the design phase. They have completed the site survey, did the initial communication again with the DNR to get the location approved. They last did that in the year 2000. That has been taken care of. If you look in the packet for this topic, Veerbecker has the schedule outlined in the agreement. The bulk of the work is actually going to take place in 2026. There are a few items that are going to take place in 2025. So it'll take them 2 years to complete this design. The topo survey, the CSM, we have to do some right-of-way relocation. On Waterman Way, we have a really big right-of-way. We want to reduce that down to the normal size to give us more property, more park property, and then the location of the well. We are working with the Parks Department, Jake Anderson, when we begin review of location of the well on the property. Before anything becomes final, it'll be coming back here to the Public Works Committee as well as City Council. But this is just the initial stages. There's going to be wellhead protection plans written with the new well. That's the DNR requirement. And along with that, we are gonna have wellhead protection plans written for our other wells as well. So we have the production well design, the pump house design as part of this agreement. Again, as for $148,000. It does not include construction management services, which I'll be bringing that forward in 2025 when we begin talking about the 2026 capital budget. So that's it for a summary at this time for the well 4 design. Any questions?
I have one question. It might be minor. Under the topographic site map, paragraph E, client shall request private utility locates if desired. And if we did, they would coordinate it, but an additional service. Do we know if we're requesting private utility locations? And if so, do we know what it would take for them to coordinate that work?
Utility locates happens with every project we do, so that's standard. As far as the city, we do not have private utilities, meaning we don't have electrical service inside the property that we would have to have a different locate company come in and locate.
Okay,
The other utilities that are in the right of way, they will be contacted by the engineer. All their utilities will be identified and included in a plan set. So that will be covered.
okay.
Any other questions for this topic?
I would move approval of the contract.
I'll second.
Thank you. I've got an approval in a second. Any other discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Motion carries. Thank you. Number 6C, discussion and consideration of Rebecca Professional Services Agreement to complete construction management services for the Kelly Place Stormwater Improvement Project. Dan?
So these next three items, Brad is actually managing for us. So Brad is attending the meeting right now via Zoom. Brad, take it away.
All right,
Thanks,
so,
Paul.
thank
I thought
you.
maybe we were gonna have somebody else presenting.
I'm just here
We had
for
the
my good
baby in
looks.
run.
Yeah, yeah.
Oh.
He just wanted to press all the buttons, so I don't think that would have worked very well.
Okay. Okay.
So this is part of our Reach 64 projects. This is phase 2, if you want to call it that. Preliminary engineering was done last year to siphon out what is going to be the best possible project for this particular location and for the city's efforts trying to meet our adaptive management requirements for the TMDL for the Rock River. So this project will basically almost get us there, thanks to some re-engineered stormwater modeling that we did as part of the stormwater quality plan update. This is for $60,000 for construction, site observation, and administrative services. There's one item in the current language of the contract that we have to hash out tomorrow morning when we have our pre-bid meeting with Veerbecker, but that's just discussing benches. The original design had bench locations strewn throughout the pathway area. And upon further review of the existing design, we're looking at potentially revising that, keeping spaces open for those benches, but not adding them at the beginning, seeing as we don't necessarily know whether we want this turning into something that more resembles a park versus a pathway. It is between 4 residential properties that exist there today, and we're not so sure that we want people lingering in these spaces, and we don't have the budget to do substantial maintenance in the future as it is. So just letting you know that that's a part of the language, that it can stay in there, but it may not be asked of Veerbecker in the future. Other than that, I have nothing to add really to the existing task order language. And I'll take any questions anybody might have on that.
Any questions for Brad?
Is this, you said the first phase was more of a design and this is phase 2. Are there any subsequent phases coming up as part of this project?
So technically phase 1 was the Stonebridge project, the other underground wet detention chambers that we put in at Stonebridge Park. This is phase 2 in terms of construction, right? So that was a construction project. This is the second phase in terms of construction. The third phase, we're looking at potential future installations at right now, as it is, at Frostwoods Beach and potentially Winnequa Park. And there's also potential improvements that may or may not be made with the any future redevelopment of the civic campus property. So City Hall, Community Center, there may be stormwater improvements involved with potentially with those projects in the future. So there's not a lot of there's no more phosphorus in terms of capturing phosphorus that we'll have to get after this project is done and reach 64, we will have met our standards for phosphorus removal. We will be just short of TSS, suspended solids removals. So the next project we do may or may not get there depending on the size and the size of the watershed. So
I guess it's not really even a concern, it was just an observation and part of this agreement with your Vicar. There's no H&H modeling. This just seems to be like construction oversight. So I'm assuming that was done in either a previous phase or in future phases, they're gonna actually do that. Like to determine how big this thing actually needs to be.
no, we did that last year with the preliminary engineering. So in terms of this project, preliminary engineering was done in 2024. And then in 2025, or I'm sorry, in 2023, preliminary engineering was done. 2024 was final design. And this is the construction phase, which is pretty typical for our public works projects to do a 3-phase approach: preliminary, final, design, and then construction.
And with that, we'll soon have the bid award coming to Public Works Committee. Is that in April, Brad? For the bid award?
We should have that in April. That is correct. Yep.
Any other questions? Hearing none, I'll take a motion.
To approve.
Do I have a second?
I'll second.
I have a second. Any other further discussion, questions? Hearing none, all those in favor say aye.
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 Motion carries. Thank you. We'll go to number 6D, discussion and consideration of MG&E agreement to install LED streetlights. Brad, I'm assuming that's you too?
That's correct. So this is part of our LED streetlight conversion project for residential streetlights only. We have, I believe, 250,000 in that budget as it exists right now. The bid that came in for supplying of materials was about 59,000. The estimated cost for MG&E services to do this work is 70,000. And so we should have a healthy balance considering we have an $80,000 federal loan or grant, sorry, not loan, from the carbon reduction program to perform this work. Now that will only fund materials. So there's the potential that we could expand the scope of this project in the near future, given the fact that we have some budget left over. Or we can move that budget into subsequent years for future projects as well. So this is just for this year's 250 residential streetlights that we need to get swapped out for LEDs.
Thank you. Any questions for Brad?
Yeah, a quick question. I just happened to notice the thing that caught my eye was the estimated cost of work is 70,000, but that's not guaranteed and it's not to exceed. So to me, that's a ballpark estimate. And it sounds like there might be some sludge funds available or excess surplus at the moment. If there is, if exceeds that 70,000, is there any concern with current state of affairs with costs of supply chain and materials that might drive that cost much higher than it is right now?
So that's kind of a two-phased answer for that question. So first off, we've bounced this around between MG&E's attorney and our city attorney, and MG&E is unwilling to budge on that particular set of language. They will not set a fixed cost and they will not set a not to exceed clause. Given that, we have gotten previous estimates from MG&E for this work that were in about the $68,000 range. So the $70,000 a year or a year and a half later is probably just looking at that number and inflating it for the next year. So I'm pretty comfortable with that. Given our budget situation, we have plenty of funds available if we do have runover of that particular estimate. And then in terms of cost of materials, that's all funded it's funded up front by the city, but it's all reimbursable. And the fact that we have $30,000 more left in grant funding, or $20,000 more left in grant funding on top of what the existing bid was, I'm pretty comfortable with that number as well. So, also bids are bids, and that price cannot creep. Once they sign on the dotted line, it is what it is at that point. So we've already gotten the materials ordered, and I believe shipping is happening as we speak, actually. So that shouldn't be impacted.
So I'd like to add that on a project such as this, where it's an estimated price, they're going to be required to notify us as we approach the estimated price in the agreement. We'll compare that to lights installed versus dollars left to be spent. So when we get to probably around the $60,000 range, $65,000 range, we will talk with the city administrator about what's next. I mean, like Brad said, we do have 30,000 in balance remaining, so it could be where it comes back to committee and council if we have to go beyond that $68,000. So we'll be watching it. We're going to require MG&E to notice us as we get to that figure. So it's not just going to be a runaway train and exceed that. So Brad, make note of that to convey that with your contact at MG&E as we approach that estimated price.
Yeah, I did actually say that to their attorney when they sent it over to us. I wrote them back and told them that whoever the project manager was, make sure that we're on the same page. Plus, we'll have a pre-construction meeting with MG&E. They're likely to sub this out to one of their responsible subcontractors that they use. So we'll have a pre-con meeting and make sure everybody's on the same page, that their administrative staff, whoever invoices, is aware that they should be putting percentages in their invoices for the city. So
Did they say any idea how long this will take to do all of them?
well, that's one of their other things that they didn't put in the contract agreement. They will not sit on a certain date, an in-by date or a due-by date, so to speak. So, but in talking with them, their subcontractor had hinted at that this was only going to take a matter of like the end of the summer to complete it.
I actually have a follow-up question, Brad, to Bill's question, which is, okay, let's assume the materials are on their way and there's not going to be any problem with the materials or with labor. But you also just stated, as we know, that this is a reimbursable on a reimbursable basis. Is there any possibility that the kittywampushness, if you will, that's going on with the federal government in terms of freezing funds, including IRA funds, are going to mean that the reimbursement doesn't happen?
It's my understanding that these projects are in a legislative budget. So I'm not sure how that'll work. We'll have to get DOT confirmation. But if the legislature approves it and it's slated for a specific, it's already awarded. I don't know what the executive branch of the government in terms of powers that they have over that. Because it was approved by Congress.
We have two other projects besides this that is receiving federal grant funding.
I know.
We have the Lagoon to Nord Bridge.
Yep.
That's in the design phase, and then we have the
Yep.
Nichols Road that will soon be in the design phase. So yeah, that's just up in the air right now, what's gonna happen at the federal level.
Yeah. Not saying that's a reason why we shouldn't approve it. I'm just, I'm assuming that we all have our eyes wide open in that regard, because honestly, we don't know what's gonna happen.
Right?
So here's some
Um,
good news. We have enough budget right now to
Yeah.
do this project without the grant funding.
Right, agreed.
That is good.
Okay, any other questions? All right, I'll take a motion.
A motion.
I have a motion. Do I have a second?
I'll second.
Got a second? Any other discussion? All those in favor say aye.
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 Thank you. Moving to 6E, discussion and consideration of the charges of chapter 216 stormwater and erosion control ordinance.
All right. So this is an ordinance update. It comes out of the efforts to update our stormwater quality plan. This is also an effort that was funded via urban non-point source planning grant from the WDNR in 2024, and it's carried over into 2025. The gist of the updates are to come current with county and DNR standards, especially technical standards and technical language, while also addressing some loopholes and some very subjective language that was in the previous ordinance, making it much more concise, easier to understand, especially for developers who look at these ordinances and regulations ahead of time before bidding projects and asking the city for money for TIF funds and stuff like that. So the notable differences or revisions that you might see throughout the red line version, there's an added definition for green roofs now, which have become more prominent, especially in tight properties, smaller properties that are getting redeveloped because they're trying to maximize their footprint on the property. And therefore, there's very, very little space left to do stormwater controls and erosion control. We've redefined new and redevelopment in the definitions and in the standards to more closely match the city of Madison and Fitchburg. It's kind of a hybrid between the language that each of those communities have. And it's much easier to understand compared to our previous language, and it's more thorough, making it better for the city in terms of enforcement and making sure that developers understand exactly what it is the city is requiring of them. We've also added a piece of language for redevelopment projects that was not present before, where we now are looking at or regulating sites that are less than 20,000 square feet in impervious space. So there's certain properties in the city of Monona that cannot redevelop the property and be over 20,000 square feet. So therefore, when they redevelop a property, they're not held to any kind of stormwater standards, even though these are fairly large projects. And the goal here is to close that loophole to make sure that some of these properties that are being redeveloped now have to have permanent stormwater features on the property. And that's because the city has seen over the years inundation of our existing infrastructure, stormwater infrastructure. It's pretty common for infrastructure to be built to handle like a 2-year event. And 2-year event is peanuts nowadays compared to the kind of rainfall events that we're getting. We've had street flooding and backups in the system. We've had to invest some significant dollars in the city in certain locations to prevent backups and inner city flooding and destruction of property. So the goal here is if a private or property owner comes in, wants to redevelop a property, that they're required on that property to handle their own stormwater. So they're not inundating the city system and causing more havoc and damage downstream from their property. So this is going to help close that loophole. Outside of that, we now add in parking lots as a redevelopment project. When these contractors come through and these private property owners, they strip an entire parking lot and they're not required to put in stormwater, typical stormwater features like inlets and stuff like that, sumps and whatnot. Now we'll be able to capture those types of projects as well. And then there's just some technical standard updates for permitting of erosion control permits. Now horizontal drilling will be captured as a permitted item. which can cause a ton of erosion and a huge mess, especially with some of these contractors from out of town coming in from, for instance, Texas or somewhere else that they don't have these same regulations. Now they'll be required to adhere to the cities and the DNR's technical standards for erosion control for those projects. Outside of that, just a couple other items that we've updated were some of the language for reporting to the city when projects are starting and or finished. We've tightened up the dates. And if you see that, it's towards the end of the ordinance. Some of the dates in there were like, you finish a project, you have to inform the city within a year. Like, no, you need to inform the city within a month. Like that doesn't make any sense. So some of that language had to be adjusted. And so that we did so. To follow up on this, we'll have the stormwater quality plan updates, the overall comprehensive stormwater quality plan brought before the committee in upcoming months. I'm hoping by the April meeting, you'll be able to take a look at that.
Great, thank you, Brad. Questions for Brad, comments?
I have a question, Brad. And the basic question is whether or not this is the final version here, because when I look at some of the comments on the right-hand side, some of them seem unanswered. An example is on page 94. There's a comment, the legality of this provision is questionable. The city attorney should weigh in. And it's not clear that that got answered, that the city attorney weighed in. There's a similar one on page 89. So in other words, comments, some of the comments people put in right underneath it, somebody else commented and basically said done. But in these cases, I don't see that the comment was followed up on.
Yeah, we had internal discussions with our engineer and then there was no additional language added. Language that I had asked them to look into, for instance. So those comments can be deleted. The follow-up was taken care of. with those.
That's all I'm asking. Yeah, thanks.
Great, thank you, Dave, and thank you, Brad. Anything else?
Hey, Brad, I had a chance to take a look at this a little bit and we communicated through emails, but briefly. It's a big document and it's a lot to digest. I have a couple of suggestions, and I don't think anything is major. A lot of what is written here is probably pulled from other municipalities' documents and state recommendations as well. So I guess a general question for me is like, how far can you go with the language in this document? That's just more curious question than anything, because I would imagine that there are limitations by other jurisdictions as to what we can actually specify for infiltration, specific infiltration rates or distances or things like that. So is this actually a working document where we can amend it as you see fit? And it's going to have to get approved by the state, I would imagine, or are there certain guardrails that you have to adhere to?
This does get sent to the state and they do review the city's ordinance as part of our MS4 reporting. And that's on an annual basis. We do not need to inform the DNR of ordinance changes. It's simply stated in their language for our MS4 permit that we adhere to their standards and or can exceed at the local jurisdictions, acceptance of that. So to your point or question, we can exceed standards, and we do with this ordinance from the DNR, and we even exceed the standards of the county. There is a very keen balancing act, though, where if you get too strict, you become the city that nobody wants to develop in, or it becomes very expensive to do so. And you no longer have the opportunities available to some of the smaller developers or existing landowners that want to potentially do these types of projects in the near future. So we don't want to we don't want to, you know, exempt those types of parties from being able to do projects on their own property. While at the same time, we want to capture the essence of this is to make sure that the city is not required to take on additional infrastructure to, you know, to accommodate all these large developments that might be happening in certain areas in the city of Monona. But it's also not their, it shouldn't be required of the private property owner, in my opinion, that they have to treat stormwaters for the city's benefit. You know what I mean? So there's the handling of runoff and flood prevention, and then there's stormwater treatment, and sometimes they go hand in hand and sometimes they don't. And so we're trying to kind of balance the two, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I get it. And again, that's more of a curious question for me. So I have some specific things I would like to point out, and then some of them I'll maybe talk to you offline because they're ticky-tack things, but one of them you kind of mentioned earlier, and that was the idea that storms are becoming more frequent and more intense. And so in the definitions of design storm, you have specific 1 year, 2 year, 10-year, 24-hour storms with numeric criteria. I'm assuming that is from Atlas 14, and if it is there any, it's not out yet, but I would imagine when Atlas 15 becomes available, you're gonna wanna actually incorporate those because those are the ones that include forecasts for climate change.
Absolutely. And we will, once it's approved and it's out there, we will incorporate it into our ordinance language. Yep.
Okay,
And
oh, go ahead.
I've been very, very interested in that topic myself. I even sent Dan and our city administrator and our city planner an email regarding the Atlas 15 progress, so to speak, from NOAA. And I know that they are trying to get that out there by like 2026, 27 timeframe. So once it's out and it's approved and it's regulated, we will be putting it in to our models and making sure that we have it in our ordinance as well.
So Brad, when that comes out, will this document need to come back to committee and council to add that new Atlas 15 language?
Yeah, that's correct. And it's very likely we'll be able to remove the 200-year event, which is kind of a non-standard event. And the only reason that's in there is because local jurisdictions within Dane County have been ahead of the game and realized that 100-year events are not 100-year events anymore. And so we wanted to make sure we were capturing those larger storm events on private property and not, like I said before, inundating our own city infrastructure. But yeah, that'll be, you know, we'll probably have to come back, and usually when there's a federal regulation, then state has to accept it and make their own version of that regulation, and then it gets doled out to, you know, local jurisdictions to do the same.
Okay, great. That's good to hear. And then continuing on with definitions, I'm glad to see green roof added. That's becoming, you know, we don't see it all that often, but I have a feeling it's going to be more an important part of areas that are like ultra urban or areas that have less space for redevelopment. So it's good to have that in there. One suggestion would be to reword the definition it's currently as pervious pavement and to be consistent with technical standard 1008, rename it permeable pavement. This is just your experience, so I didn't know beforehand, but it is actually specific definitions for pervious, porous, and permeable. So what technical standard, DNR technical standard 1008 calls it permeable pavement.
Okay.
You mentioned something earlier about the timing of reporting completion of construction projects. I noted, and actually I'd really be interested in your feedback on this, but I noted in section 216.11, subtopic 7 and 8, it specifies 30 days to submit as-bills, but inspections are to be are to occur within 10 days. Hey, wouldn't you want as-built when you do your inspections?
Not really, because the underground stuff is not going to be part of that inspection process either. I can't get into the facilities. So the as-bills are a final check. And usually we'll withhold TIF funding until we have verification from the developer that everything went in as it was proposed and accepted by the Public Works Committee and the Plan Commission and the City Council.
Just scrolling down here, I jotted a couple notes down. I think one of the things in a site plan was identification of potentially contaminated soils. Is it worthwhile adding reference on how, where one goes to determine that? Or is this a subjective, you just look and you think you see a pile of gas cans and that's potentially a
No, it's. I don't think that we need to put that in there. I think that just as part of the application process, the city will give the feedback and the city's engineer will also give the feedback that you need to reference the Burt's site and report any past or present contaminated sites within your property. And as part of our administrative review, we do that anyway already. Now it's just actually written in stone, so to speak. It's actually in the ordinance. It wasn't in there before. So it's an action we're already doing. It's just not one that was codified.
Okay, and then I'll just leave with my final comment is towards the end where there's talk about separation distance and infiltration systems. The separation distance on the bottom, from the bottom of the infiltration practice, whatever it may be, to the high or seasonal high groundwater level. I think you changed it to reflect what the county currently has. I don't know where they came up with those numbers, but they seem a little bit high to me. And I would have to go back and double check, but I think DNR is less restrictive at 3 feet, and the county's asking for 5 feet in certain situations. I would, well, maybe this is my homework, but to find out where the county came up with that number, because the research I'm aware of says 3 feet is more than adequate.
Okay. I'll ask the county. Sadly, if they don't change theirs, we can't change ours. We have to be as strict as the county is when it comes to that. So I'll ask the county where they got it.
I think it might be difficult in areas, and in this particularly in certain areas of Monona, where you have shallow groundwater and you are not able to do anything in those situations. And I think right now that separation is 3 feet to shallow groundwater where you could still infiltrate. If you put it to 5 feet, I think you rule out a whole lot more areas.
Yeah, I understand. Yeah. I'll ask them about that. There's not a lot of locations we can do infiltration in Monona, like you were just saying, though, with the groundwater table. A lot of our redevelopment sites are on Broadway, and Broadway tends to have one of the highest groundwater tables that there is in the city.
That's why I would really advocate in future development for green roofs.
Right. Yeah. I agree.
Okay. Bill, is there anything else? Any other questions for Brad? Do I have a motion?
I move the recommended approval of the ordinance, and I'm tending to want to add with any appropriate changes from Bill's comments that Brad finds, like the word change, that we would approve it with those changes after any research into those questions.
Great. Thank you, Dave. Do I have a second?
I second.
I have a second. Any other discussion?
Alderman Moore, I have one comment.
Yes,
Specifically, if we could make, this motion to include Bill's, comment about the definition from pervious pavement to permeable pavement. That way, we'll carry that same comment to city council on February 17th.
okay, great. That seems to be a friendly amendment. Dave, are you accepting of that?
Yes, I am.
Okay, thank you. Any other comments? I have a comment, which is, Bill, I very much appreciate that. I know this is your bailiwick, and I can tell, and I very much appreciate the thoroughness with which you reviewed the document. We all appreciate it.
So you're saying that Bill and I are the only two stormwater nerds in the room right now? Is that what?
Well, that could be true, yeah. And we very much appreciate it. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Motion carries. Thank you very much.
Thank you, everybody. Have a good
Thank
night.
you, Brad. Moves us to number 7, Public Works and Utility Operations Report. Dan?
The written report was included in the packet for your reading. I do not have anything to add to that. And we will have a March 5th meeting. We have items on the agenda already for next month.
Okay. Thank you. Before we adjourn, I would just like to say that I very much appreciate the staff pulling together this packet. We broke the records this week at with city council. We had our packet for our city council meeting was 301 pages. And I think we did pretty well here on the Public Works meeting too at 100 pages. So I appreciate everybody wading through all the materials and appreciate the effort on staff's part and pulling all those materials together. Does anybody have any questions any questions for information from the staff before we adjourn? Okay, I'll take a motion to adjourn.
A motion.
Great, I've got a motion and I've got a second with Tim. All those in favor say aye.
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 Thanks all very much. I hope it hasn't started spitting yet, but I appreciate everybody. And if it has, Leslie and Dan and Bill, a safe travel home. And thanks again tonight, everybody, for your input. Have a good evening.
Thank you
Thank
all.
you. You
Thank
too.
you all.
Yeah.